Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Ask iToo live stream, the first of 2024. Jaime's with me. We're both on screen,
Hi, everyone.
hopefully.
Yep, happy to be back.
It's been a while,
Excellent.
right, Jaime?
Yeah, it's been like, I think it was July the last time we did this. We have an excuse though. We've been quite busy, and I want to remind everyone that we are a small team of people, so we've been doing a bunch of things. So I think it was July the last time, I think. And since then we've been doing a few things, not small things, important things. I mean, we had the internal stuff in the middle, like Black Friday, but after summer, for example, we decided that we were gonna go to Autodesk University, which, I mean, it was a totally different approach of what we've seen in the past with events. This was huge. I mean, and then we've been
about 10,000 people, wasn't it?
I think it was between 10 and 12,000 people.
It was absolutely enormous.
Yeah, all gathered in the same place. This was in Vegas. And when you get there, you realize what's the real size of Autodesk, and maybe how small is M&E within the whole universe of Autodesk, which is tiny, by the way. But that was a great experience. I think Paul dropped the URL for our blog post. There you can find the conference, which was quite interesting, by the way. We combined RailClone with our free plugins and Forest Pack, and it was amazing. It was full room, and everyone was so happy. And besides that, I mean, we've been busy with internal stuff, and it was Black Friday in November. And besides that, we wanted to stop and think, because 2024 is going to be a big year in this company. Mainly because it's our 25th anniversary. We were founded 25 years ago, and then because we've been because we've been thinking about what's the roadmap for the future and what we want to do with the company in the future. Meanwhile, we got new gear. You can see Paul and myself, we look like YouTubers, all the YouTubers, I would say.
I'm alarmingly high definition now. It's quite disconcerting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Well, maybe we shouldn't use the word old, but maybe mature or wise or whatever. And well, 2024 is going to be plenty of big news. And the biggest maybe and the main thing is that there's going to be a new version of Forest Pack. Forest Pack 9 should come out around summer, but it's going to be in beta very soon.
Yeah, so final release will be summer, right? But the actual beta will probably be, well, we haven't got a date exactly, but it's not going to be long to wait to try some bits and pieces out.
It's going to be within weeks. So, I mean, you guys are going to have the chance to. And we were thinking before, by the end of 2023, where we want to take the plugin in the future. And we thought that Forest Pack, as its name says, it's a pack, should be like a vegetation system in the future. And that's why we are going to be introducing a bunch of new stuff that maybe we cannot unveil everything today. But again, the beta is going to be public in a few months. And Paul's going to show some of the stuff today. Yeah, it's a small,
tiny, and not in a lot of detail because
exactly.
We want to keep.
Exactly. I would call it a tease.
Yeah, let's go tease. Jaime's going to tell me to stop when I've shown too much.
Exactly. And then, by the way, the noise you can hear in the background is because we got new gear, lighting, cameras, but the chair is the same as always. So, and then besides that, 2024 our idea is, of course, we're going to be keep the work on assets. We've been doing a lot of R&D with scanning and photogrammetry, and that has to do with Forest Pack 9 as well. And then since it's our 25th birthday, we thought that we need a new website. So there's going to be a bunch of changes in the website. We'll be doing a lot of news as well, and then we will spend the second half of the year thinking about RailClone as well. We are not looking at the major version of RailClone before the end of 24, but for sure we should have something around 25.
Things will happen in RailClone.
Yeah,
you'll see.
Yeah, So again, we're going to be busy. Thanks for the patience. We remain a small team of 7 people, so we do our best. Let's go.
Yeah,
we have 1 hour, so Paul likes to extend it.
I know. That's a Paul Roberts hour, which can be anything up to
exactly. So I will play the backup thing. Yeah. Thanks for seeing everyone back. We are very happy to be back and excited.
And I see people saying hello in the chat. That's really great to see. And excellent. As always, feel free to ask questions. We'll monitor the chat during this, so you can ask us anything. Let us know what you think of what we're showing. The format hasn't changed for this one, although for the next one we'll possibly have a guest. So we'll let you know more about that nearer the time. But the format for this one is going to be the usual collection of questions that we've been asked in the last month or so. Mixture of Forest Pack and RailClone, mixture of complexity, so some simplish stuff to some, I don't think there's anything too advanced in this one actually. It's all relatively straightforward. So hopefully you'll get something out of it, but also just happy to be here again. So as Jaime teased, we have got Forest Pack 9 on the horizon, and I was going to kickstart this with a little bit of information about probably the biggest development in Forest Pack 9, which is that it's going to be bundled with a new plugin. I was thinking about holding this till the end to make you watch all like 2 hours or whatever of it, but let's get it out of the way so that people get to see it and they don't have to watch the rest of it if they don't want to, but please do stick around. So what have we been up to? Well, we have been asked what new things are you working for Forest Pack 9, and one of the things that we see as a thing that's missing in 3ds Max now, especially since the older versions of these plugins disappeared, is that there's no decent system that's easy to use and fast and interactive for creating climbing plants. And this seems like something called Forest Pack should be able to do. And so what we've been hard at work on is a new plugin, which is tentatively called Forest Ivy. I don't know if that will change because it's certainly can be used for more things than Ivy, but internally that's what we're calling it. And I was just going to give you the very briefest of demos in 3ds Max of the state we're at with it now, so that you can get a little glimpse of it, and hopefully it will tempt you to try it when the beta version comes out. So I'll switch over to 3ds Max, and no fancy graphics for this. This is just some behind the scenes R&D. We want to save off the good stuff until the final release. So I have a wall and I want to grow some ivy up of it. So I think we've probably all experimented with some of the ivy systems we might have seen in the past, but this one is very, very fast. So the way it works is we have a new Forest Pack object here called Forest Ivy, and you just click and you drag that into the scene like so. I'm not going to show you how to create one from scratch, just library-based stuff for now. So this will ship with a library. At the moment, I've only got a couple of examples here, but it will be more extensive than this when it goes out. Basically what you do is you just pick a preset from your library, and I've got a couple here that I've made. I'm going to pick this one, load it up, and what we're going to do is to tell it which surfaces we want to grow on. Now, the aim with this was not to just plant a seed and let it go wherever. We wanted something that was more art directable than that, since it's quite hard to kind of tame a completely wild algorithm. So what we have got here, and this is a completely custom algorithm that we've created, is the ability to paint a baseline. So rather than plant a seed, you paint a baseline. So I'll basically click on this brush here, and then I can just paint on the wall like so. And you can see that that grows out there pretty fast. And I could easily draw another one here if I wanted to, up the side here. And you might think, well, yeah, that's cool, but I don't really want to paint every single branch of this ivy grow system. And you don't have to. So this is just the baseline. From this point onwards, the algorithm will allow you to grow the ivy through as many iterations as you want. And the nice thing is how fast this is, right? So what I can do is come down to this growth level option here, which is basically how we control the growth of this ivy. And I'll just dial it up, and you can see the ivy is growing in real time. And you can just keep going, keep going. The nice thing is, even when it's grown like this, even though there's thousands of leaves on here now, I can still come back in and I can just paint on this wall. Just keep painting new ivies wherever I want them. So that's pretty cool. You can also go back in and obviously delete any of these, deletes the whole baseline. I can delete any of these baselines that I've created at any point and go back and start again, or you can ditch them all and start again. So it's really powerful. It's really fun to use because you can see everything updating very, very quickly. And I really hope it's going to help people to create these kinds of styles. So I say I'm not allowed to say too much more than that, I don't think. I will just mention a couple of other things perhaps, which is that if you go down to the display rollout, you can see here that we've got a quick mesh option in the viewport, which is how I'm able to display this whole ivy object without having to worry about converting it to kind of proxy display objects like pyramids or something. So it's displaying the actual leaf geometry, but it's instancing in the viewport. So it's very, very fast. And you'll notice that underneath that, it also says render instancing support. So all the leaves on this ivy are being instanced at render time to make it a very, very efficient object. Currently, as it stands at the moment, that's compatible with V-Ray and Arnold. And we have an API so that other renderers like Corona can add support for it as soon as they're able to. So hopefully we should get full instancing in most of the major renderers as well. So the system itself is actually, we tried to make it simplish to use as well. So obviously we can just load in presets, and I imagine that's how most people will use it. But for those that do want to create their own, it's not too arcane, the algorithm. Without going into it too much, there's just things like branching angles, how adhesive the ivy is, what percentage you want it to climb, so vertically or to spread out to the sides. And then you've got things like a depth distance, so how far off of the wall does the ivy go until it gets killed, and we can also kill off the ivy on the ground. You might be wondering about this window here too, where it's climbed up across the window a little bit. So we've also got the ability to exclude the ivy from particular material IDs to stop it growing across bits of the geometry you don't want it to. So there's lots and lots of control in here. Like I say, it's really fast. One of the things I really like to be able to do with this as well, because I've got some more hanging plants here. So as well as growing up from the ground, I really like this for being able to just paint along the top of a wall. And we can just, oh, hang on a minute. Forgot to click the paint button. So click on the paint button and we can just paint along there. And look, we've got some hanging plants along the top of the wall. That's pretty much instant. Yeah, so it's a really, really powerful system. I'm interested to know what you think.
So what we're working on right now, I mean, this is ready. What we're working right now, it's in the libraries, and we took the chance to, because it's not going to be only ivy. It's going to have a bunch of climbing plants. So we took the opportunity to do some quite nice research on photogrammetry and scanning, and there's going to be a collection, and there's going to be a new library coming with ForestPack 9 with a bunch of climbing plants.
Yeah,
very, very high quality material. I mean, we took quite a few time on investigating all this. So I mean, it's going to be very nice. We are very excited with this, and obviously looking to the future. And this is, I mean, we would like this to be a new system to create not only climbing plants but other type of plants. So that's the idea.
Mm-hmm. That's as much as I can say, is it, Jaime?
Yeah.
Okay.
So let's go to the tech stuff.
Let's move on. Okay.
So I understand that everyone is excited. I mean, we can see some excitement in the comments. Again, once we release this, there's going to be full documentation about it, and there's tons of content to create around this.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really enjoying using it myself, and I think that's, if a plugin's fun to use, that's a good start, I think. So yeah, and I didn't get to talk about it, but it's got quite a cool system where you can layer up objects on the branches, so you can have leaves and flowers and, you know, as many layers of objects on these branches as you want. So it makes it quite a powerful, flexible system for all kinds of things, as Jaime said, and possibly the start of something bigger.
Yeah, there's a question from Amit. It says, does this hanging plant respect the geometry normal, or will it penetrate the geometry and we have to do some manual settings like the way you use edge mode?
It should respect it. It should respect it. You can see it's kind of clinging to the sides. You won't get too much penetration inside the... Hang on, it helps if I switch to the 3ds Max view. You can see there isn't too much of the plant interpenetrating the geometry there. So it's doing a pretty good job of adhering to the surface when it comes within range, which you just set a value. Like if it gets this close to the surface, sticks to it again. So it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, one of the reasons why we are so excited about this is because we feel the same way that we could feel like Forest back 10 years ago, and it's like we are looking forward to receive all the feedback from the community, from the users, and the same way in which Forest back grew along with you guys, because you kept, all the features that right now, edge mode and all of them came out from your ideas and from your suggestions and things that we saw on the forums and that. So this time is very exciting for us. And as soon as we have it live and going, we're expecting your feedback and we believe that this can be, very powerful. So excellent.
Yeah, that's why we wanted to give you a little preview, so that because it's quite hard to attract people to test the betas quite often. So I think with a new plugin like this, get it helping understanding how you want to use it, what's working well, what could be improved early on is going to be really helpful for us. So as soon as the previews the betas drop, then it would be fantastic if people are willing to give it a go and let us know.
Assuming that we have a few, I don't want to say names, but assuming we have a bunch of users, active users of the beta versions on the list of audience right now, I suppose saying, we encourage you guys to download the beta and try it, play with it, and send all the feedback that you can.
So there's a question there about is the Ivy going to be animatable? Depends what you mean by animatable. Kind of, maybe not for the very first release. So it's kind of animatable in the sense that these properties are animatable. So this growth level is animatable, and you could animate this growing like this. So that would be possible. But at the moment, it's growing segment by segment on the branch. And so it's a little bit like, looks a little bit stop animated kind of thing. But we're aware of it. So that's useful feedback immediately. That's something, if enough people want that's something we know we'll need to work on, whether that's for this version or a future version. You can also animate the baseline that you've drawn as well. So you can animate that drawing too. But again, it's a little bit, it's going section by section. So you can see it kind of isn't the smoothest. But if that's the kind of animation you meant.
Yeah.
Lovely. Before I move on to other cases, something quite prosaic compared to this, really. Are there any other questions about Ivy, Jen?
Nope.
No. Again, I just love the speed. It's so nice to be able to play with this almost in real time. Lovely. Okay, so I had a question a while back, which was basically, hey, how do you make a chain with RailClone? Okay, and I thought, well, that's a nice simple question, and obviously I'll just send them to our chain tutorial that we've got. And then when I looked for our chain tutorial, which of course is the sort of starting tutorial for most array-based modeling tools, I realized that we haven't got one. So this is my attempt to redress that balance. This is a very simple introduction to RailClone through the creation of just a chain link fence. So this is really for new RailClone users. If you're an established RailClone user, just bear with me and we'll get to some other things soon. But if you are completely new to RailClone, this is a nice introduction to how this system works. And I am going to start very simple with just a simple chain link in the fence and a RailClone object and a spline. So as you can imagine, we need a new RailClone object to create a chain, and we need to open the style editor by going to the style rollout and popping open the style editor. I'll put it up there. Hopefully that's out of the way. In the items rollout. what we need to do is to get a set of instructions how to distribute this chain along this spline. And in order to do that, you use a generator, and I'm going to use a linear generator, the simplest of the two. Then we need to tell it which spline to use. So I'm going to drag in a spline node and connect it to the spline input and pick a spline from the scene. And then we want to pick this piece of chain link from the scene. So I could do it in two ways. I could do it the same way as I just did the spline node, but you can also import things from the scene by clicking on them, right-clicking in the style editor and clicking import scene selection. And then what do we want to do? We want to wire this to the default input. So that's just going to simply distribute this chain link along the spline. So nice and easy so far. So there are a couple of things. First of all, it is bending the chain link around the corners, and generally speaking, chains don't bend. Chain links don't bend. So we want to turn that off. So you can go into the segment settings, come to deform, and just turn off bend. And while I'm here, I'll turn off slice too. So now I've just got these. Now the other problem obviously is that they are not overlapping as chains should. So in order to fix that, what I will do is to come into the segments settings and go to padding. And what padding does is it controls the spacing between the different pieces of geometry. And that can be a positive number to add a gap or a negative number to cross them over. So if, for example, if I added about negative, how have I made this too big? If I added negative values there to overlap the chains, you can see that that's starting to work. Okay, so that's kind of working now. But what we want to do is I need to do two things. You kind of want the chains to every other chain rotate kind of 90-ish degrees, but you also want to add a bit of randomness to it. So I'm going to tackle the randomness first. So I'm going to come into the transform rollout, and in here, you've got some transform randomization settings. So for example, I can turn on rotation and I can just add a bit of minus Y rotation there. Now, if you look at this, the spline is always sitting, the objects are always sitting on top of the spline. And that's because by default, this segment will always sit on its lowest point. Okay. And what we want it to do is to sit kind of in the middle there. So so it stays with the spline in the middle of the chain links. So what we do is go into the segment settings again, just come to alignment, and where it says alignment Z, change it to center. And now that just centers it down on there. You could probably try and pivot as well. If the pivot's in the center, yeah, it is. Okay, so either one of those is fine. So that kind of takes care of that. I've got some randomization going on. They're overlapped okay, thanks to the padding, but I just need that 90-degree shift. So what we need to do is to create a pattern, right? Where one is normal, one is 90, one is normal, one is 90. And in order to do that, you use this operator here. An operator is a kind of way of processing segments, processing geometry. It's called sequence. So I'll just pop that on there. And then what I want to do now is in the second input is to put in another version of this that's rotated 90 degrees. So I could make that and import it into a second segment, but I'm just going to manipulate the one we have using a transform operator. So I'll just wire the transform operator in, wire that into the second sequence input, nothing much changing so far. Come into the transform settings of this operator and just change the Y rotation to 90 degrees. There we go, there's our chain. So really that's as easy as that. That's how I would create a chain in RailClone. I know it's a simple one to start with, but there might be people here who aren't RailClone users, and this can give you a sense of how that works. Another nifty trick here, I'm sure most people know this, this modifier that comes with 3ds Max, but if you've not seen it, it's kind of been in there a while now. It's this spline overlap modifier, and what it basically does is when one spline overlaps another, you can basically add a bit of thickness, and you can see it picks it up in the air a little bit, so they sit on top of one another. It's great for sort of cables, like lighting cables and things like that, if you're doing those for your interior visualizations. So you basically control the thickness of the cable, and then you've got drape, which controls how far either side of the spline it before it falls down to the ground again. It's a really nifty little modifier that I thought I'd mention while I was here and I had the excuse. Okay, so that was a quick first question. I see we have some questions.
Yeah, we have a tricky one about algorithms, and I don't know if
Let's see, which one is that? Could I ask a question about some issues I'm having with the RailClone banking algorithm? That might be a better one for support, but
yeah, that's what I suggested.
You are welcome to try. It's a difficult. It depends what the question is. If it's something I can just explain, then fine, please do. If it's some sort of issue you're having with the algorithm, best contact support because they can probably fix it for you, or we can at least log it on the system and find out what the specific use case is that you're struggling with. So just let us know.
Yeah. And then Sergey Dobry is asking about suggesting if we can have more expressions videos. We have a few tutorials on that, do we?
Yeah, we do. You know, it's a just to be totally upfront about why we don't do more of those is that for RailClone, it's because there's this perception, right, that RailClone is complicated. Yeah, and we obviously don't want people to think RailClone is complicated, but one sure way of making people think RailClone is complicated is to release a tutorial all about scripting, which would be fine if we could ensure that only people who are confident with RailClone and were very advanced already would see those. But what happens is a new person lands on that and then says RailClone is too complicated, I can't deal with it. So you know, this is the kind of dilemma, and I agree though we need more because there are users like you who would really like to get into the scripting side. So I take that on board. There is information in the documentation about it, but we don't kind of make these publicized.
By the way, Paul, did we mention that we have a new documentation site? I think we forgot about that, right?
Yeah, no, I don't think we did.
Let me paste the link here.
Yeah, so it's the same link, I think, but we've completely overhauled the documentation site. Yeah. So it's a lot more user-friendly. It's much easier to search.
That's another thing we did.
And it's also an ongoing process just to try and make the information more accessible. You will find scripting information in there. The whole of it is documented, but I understand that it needs more video content too. So I take that on board. Will there be an updated version of the RailClone City tutorial for more advanced cities? What I would say about that is maybe have a look at the Autodesk University class, because that's got some, and you might be able to combine this with the existing techniques in the RailClone City tutorial, because I think there's some interesting approaches to modeling urban environments in that, some of which I'll touch on a little bit later.
It's interesting what Lars is saying. I mean, this is something that we are fully aware of. RC has a steep learning curve. I mean, we know it. And once you discover it, I mean, people just loves it. I would even say that RailClone lovers are even more enthusiastic than ForceBack lovers. But somehow we have to work on a way in which the new generations have access to the plugin without seeing that step learning curve.
Yeah.
And assets have to play a role in that one, you know, and maybe I think we did discuss this in the past with you guys, but this is something we want to start doing after summer. But one of the ideas we have is that the same way in which you have presets with ForceBack, you should have some presets with RailClone for basic stuff, you know. So you have a preset for whatever, I mean, do a curve, for example, and then you can swap it for your geometry. Or so that's something that we're going to start thinking of after summer.
Yeah, like templates, you mean, right?
Yeah,
where it's just kind of, rather than it be a fully formed thing with material textures, that too, obviously, we'll keep doing that. But yeah, exactly. You just swap in it's like half the work's done for you. I think we've talked about it here before.
It's funny, as I'm saying, I think RailClone works exactly like in real life. We just have to think how we can do what we want to do. Yeah, kind of.
Yeah.
So we want to make it more intuitive, or just try to make that entrance to the plugin easier, and those templates that Paul mentioned might be a good way. I mean, playing with the editor should be, you know, at the end of the learning curve.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Cool. So another So just to come back to Connor's there, he was talking about vertical splines. Yeah, it doesn't. It's not sort of, RailClone originally was meant for sort of, it was sort of imagined for landscape work. So as soon as you turn the spline up that way, things get a little bit unsure. Because realistically, how do you tell it which way is up? So we're aware that needs to be improved. It's on our system. We don't have a date for it, but it's being looked at. It's like a marriage. Okay.
It's a small team, guys. Don't forget about that.
Small team, and like I say, a lot, like you've said, a lot of people who like RailClone really like RailClone and want it to do a lot of things. So we've got a list of requests and features to add to RailClone that will outlive us all, which is a good thing. So it's prioritizing. Okay, this was a question that came up recently, which was how to randomize cars specifically, but it could be any object once they've been randomly rotated inside Forest Pack. So it's something you can do with an effect. I'll show you that quickly now. I'm going to start from a new file for this one. We don't really need to start with any assets. Okay, so let's just draw a circle here. It's possibly too big. So I'm going to use this as an excuse to point out that these assets that you get for free are compatible with all of our plugins. So you can easily use cars and things from Cosmos without any problems. So I thought I downloaded one, but obviously not. So let's hope this download works. So basically, it was more of a car parking question. There was some random scattering of cars, but when you normally use translation randomization to shuffle them around, then it doesn't work. And there is a tutorial about this, but I think it probably has been overlooked. So I've got my car, here it is. So let's come into Forest Pack. And I'm just going to draw an icon and load the car up into the geometry rollout. So say you can obviously pick any geometry from the scene. That includes anything imported for any third-party library. It goes without saying, but some people aren't so aware and think you're kind of limited to what you can load through our own library browser. So let's see, I'm just going to scatter it inside this area for now. Actually, I think it illustrates the point a bit more. So I'm going to add this circle as an area rather than scatter around the outside. And you can see it's all randomized. Let me reduce that randomization a little bit. I know this isn't particularly a sensible use case. And distribution. Okay, so I've just randomly scattered some cars, so because I want to basically translate them along their axis, and like you might think you can use this translate here, but what you can see is that this is translating in world coordinates, not in local coordinates for those cars, right? So you can't use that. But what you can use is an effect. So in the effects rollout here, we can click on plus to add a new effect and click on this browser here to add one of the many, many, many effects that come with Forest Pack. And if you haven't explored this, it's well worth having a look at these. There's a ton of them and they do all kinds of useful things. But one of them is XY local translate. Okay, so what this does basically, and you load it up, is it lets you translate on the local axes. As you can see here, so this is X, let's try Y, looks more like the front of the car. Yeah, so you can see that it is just moving along the local axes. There, right? So if I was doing a car park and I wanted a little bit of randomization, the car park was in a circle like this, then you could use this to slightly offset the cars without them all starting to clash into one another. Now, the reason I avoided using the path mode was because I think we've possibly made that possible already in the path mode. So let me just double check that, because this is the other way to do it. Let me just turn off the rotation now. No, we haven't. Okay, so that's fine. We haven't. So you'd use the same thing for path mode. That's right. What we've got random position-wise on the path mode is the ability to randomize the position along the path, which wasn't possible until recently. But now you can see you can slightly adjust the position along the path, which can also be useful, right? So by combining these two, combining a little bit of randomization in this direction, and then also using the lean out effect, about local translate effect, you can get quite a lot of randomization on there. There you go. So that's the kind of thing we were looking for. So it's a little trick. I hope it makes sense. Also just a reminder that you can use any content there. Okay, good. I'm just checking the questions there, sorry.
No questions?
No questions. No questions are good.
So let's go.
Okie dokie.
Wait. There's a question. Can we make 3 wind animation?
Okay. So we have actually had this question a few times lately, but,
yeah, exactly.
but it's an interesting question, but it sort of slightly misunderstands what Forest Pack is used for. So Forest Pack doesn't manipulate in any way the geometry you scatter. So all you can do with Forest Pack is scatter trees that already have wind animation applied to them. So you would need to animate the tree and then add it to Forest Pack. But if you had an animated tree that you then subsequently added to Forest Pack, you can then control the randomization of that animation. So you could create waves of animation blowing across the scene. You could just completely randomize it. You could have it all in sync or whatever. And there's some tutorials for those online that you'll find. But what it doesn't do currently is add any animation to the plants if they don't already have it applied. Because at present, Forest Pack isn't a plant modeling tool. Yeah, and that's a part of the plant modeling process. You'd normally add that in GrowFX or SpeedTree or whatever. Or there are some decent tutorials. I'll try and remember to add one to the description. There are some decent tutorials online on how some procedural techniques for adding animation to existing static trees. I think Eloy has one. So you could use those if you've got an existing library of static trees to add animation. It is possible to do it. It's never as good as doing it in the original botanical modeler, because that's kind of been set up with joints and so forth to move at the right places. The only thing we can do is with grass is you can get basic animation by actually just animating the transforms of the grass using a noise map. And that works kind of well, actually, from a distance. If you don't need to see the grass actually bend, but you just want to see this rippling movement, you can do that. And there is a tutorial on our YouTube channel that explains how to do that. Great. Rendering distributor on network. Okay, yeah, that's a question for Chaos Group, I think. Please add more trees. I like max trees. Okay. Yeah, well, the library is something we're working on, right? We mentioned that at the beginning. Okay. This was a real simple one. In a sense, how do you create a wavy picket fence with rounded tops using RailClone? So it's basically a question about how you create this kind of sine wave effect in RailClone. And this is a good excuse to dig a little bit deeper into expressions. So you can hopefully, let's get one there. Hopefully get a sense of this. So this combines a couple of things. It combines expressions and also the ability to nest one generator inside another. So a couple of the more advanced techniques that you might find. So what I'm going to do is just show you how this is done. So I'm just going to take this spline and clone it. I've got the finished one at the back there. Okay, so my sections to build this picket fence so that it's always got a curved top. I obviously can't just scale it because otherwise the curved top will get stretched out so that it's an ellipse. So I've cut the top and the bottom off and I'll just scale the middle section. Okay, so that's how I would build this. With that done, we can just open a RailClone object, pop open the style editor, pop it up here somewhere, and add a linear generator. So what I'm going to do first of all is just put this back together again. So I'm just going to select those 3 segments. Once again, import scene selection, quickest way of doing it. Wire them to the default input, end input, start. And I'm going to set the default mode to scale, so it stretches the piece in between. Basically, it stretches whatever's in the default input. Then just for now, give it a little bit of size so that you can see down here, I've got a picket. Now you can't see the curved top, and that's because the display mode is probably set to boxes. So let's just put that to mesh so you can see it. And now you can see the curved top. Okay, so that's that. But then how do I distribute that along this spline? Well, you can do that by nesting the segment, the generator. So what I do basically is I can take the output of this generator and I can wire it to a second generator. Then wire a spline into that generator and pick a spline from the scene. So that's working. Let's actually wire it to the evenly input because we're not regularly spaced intervals, but of course it's laying down flat as we could see before. So in between those, we can add a transform node. And in order to get that to stand upright, we just adjust the rotation a little bit. So 90 degrees in the Y and the Z in this case. So now it's standing up. We can close the gaps up by adjusting the evenly. Say 7 centimeters seems about right. Okay, so there we've got that. So that's all well and good, but we haven't got the curve. So in order to get that curve, we need to create a sine wave effect if we want to do it parametrically. And that works sort of half done for you because we do have a macro for sine waves, but it isn't geared towards working in a nested generator. So I'm going to do a couple of things first of all. This generator at the end of the chain, I'm just going to rename it to make it easier to find. I'm just going to call it main. Okay, so I've just renamed it, and that is so that I can refer to it when I add a macro to this generator here. Now I'm going to export in this generator, the nested one, export the X size parameter. And come over to macros. If you look under arithmetic in here, waveforms, you've got macros for the main waveform types, and I'm going to use sine wave. So I'm just going to drag that into the scene. So this is just basically going to output a size between amplitude 1 and amplitude 2 with a distance between the wavelengths of this setting here, and it's based on the length of the spline. But as it stands, it's not going to work because this sine wave is meant to use the spline that is attached to the generator it's directly connected to. So that isn't currently going to work. What we need to do with this macro is to tell it to use this generator instead down here, and we have to do that by modifying the code. So here's for that question earlier that said they wanted some content on scripts. Here's a little bit of one. So if I double click on that macro, I can open it up, and it's not particularly complicated until you get to this arithmetic node here, and then there's just a little bit of code. Now you don't actually need to understand this terribly, but what I am looking at here is any reference to a attribute of the spline. So here you see it says X spline position, Y spline position. So these are attributes of the spline that is wired to the generator, and obviously there isn't a spline wired to this generator. So what I need to do is to tell it to use a different generator. And the way you do that is using what's called dot syntax. So I'll use the name that I gave the generator at the end of the chain, add a full stop after it before those attributes. So I'll just do it main dot, and then it's X spline position. And then here it's the same main dot Y spline position. I think the second line has one too. So main dot X spline length, main dot Y spline length. So I've just added those two words there to tell it to use the spline that's attached to this generator. And there you can see now it's working. And now I can come into my sine wave here and I can set this however I want by adjusting the two amplitude settings and the length of the wave. So that's just adapting a built-in preset there, built-in macro, which gives us kind of what we're looking for. But procedurally too, so you can always come back and adjust it. You can change the height of the lowest part, the highest part. And you can slide it along the spline as well if you wanted. And if you were using a 2D array, you can switch it to the y-axis instead of x. Clearly that makes no sense on this one. Lovely. Are there any questions before I just power on? Okay.
So we got one from Martin Frodel. What about quick mesh display in ForestPack?
We did experiment with that, and I forget the reason it wasn't included. I think it might have been because the quick mesh display mode in ForestPack works very well with models that are a reasonable poly count. But in ForestPack, you're often scattering trees which could be several million polygons. And I think we found that the efficiency gains just weren't quite as pronounced when you were dealing with objects with that kind of resolution. Certainly nothing compared to, using the points cloud display or the proxy display mode. We can certainly bring it back to the table and look at it again, but I do remember testing a version where it was implemented in it, and Nitrous just wasn't great at handling the kinds of numbers of very high poly trees that our clients are used to dealing with. So yeah, it was something we tried, didn't work as well as we'd hoped it would, so we took it out.
So we have a request from Harmandep, which basically is about adding more assets to the ForestPack libraries. Obviously, that's on the roadmap. It's a tricky one as well. We have one from Raul Gonçalves, which is how to create a curtain wall with different window types. I recall having a tutorial on that, right, Paul? But I think it's from ForestPack 2 or 3. So I'm not sure if that does apply right now. I have the link here, actually.
Yeah, have a look. There's a request before this chat started yesterday. There was a request for a curtain wall tutorial that uses RailClone Slicer. And so because we like to respond to your requests, I have quickly put something together for that, which is in next couple of questions. But it doesn't really deal with different window types. But you could easily use it in a similar way. So it's a good question that maybe I'll do a tutorial for, but maybe also the question in a minute will help out with that too. Okay. There is an old curtain wall tutorial that is RailClone 2, like you say, and it's well out of date compared to how I would do things now.
That's why I didn't paste it.
Yeah.
Okay, Byzantine about I use any animated characters with ForestPack for crowd animation. It is also possible with RailClone. I think not. For example, Stadium Crowd, we have a tutorial on that as well, right?
For ForestPack. The difference with ForestPack's got tools for dealing with animation, like you can randomize them and stuff like that. RailClone doesn't have any tools for controlling the animation that's already assigned to segments. So although you could scatter animated characters with RailClone, that would be fine. You wouldn't be able to randomly offset their playback, so they'd all move at the same time. For example. So one thing you can do is to create if you've got your characters baked in as a proxy, you can duplicate it a few times and just offset the start frame in the proxies, and I think that's still quite efficient, or as efficient as ForestPack would be doing the same thing anyway. And then you could distribute those with RailClone, but RailClone itself doesn't have animation tools, but it was conceived originally more as a modeler, so we didn't initially put those animation tools in there. Also, ForestPack has spline distribution modes, so you might find ForestPack's just as easy to use for distributing characters, animated characters, because you can distribute along splines with set distances and then randomize everything.
So it's funny because we have an old Stadium tutorial, which was very, very popular back in the days, but one of the things that we have to do, and that's a huge task, is taking all the materials that we have and update them. So there's videos out there in YouTube, which they have thousands of views, and I'm afraid that we're going to have to ditch those ones and because they're not up to date, and do them again.
Yeah, they teach bad habits in a way, because there are better ways of doing things now. Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. It's been 10 years right now since I think Paul joined the company, and well, I don't have to show you guys how much content did he develop in these 10 years. So So that's a huge task. We'll have to do someday. Okay, so we have more questions here. Well, someone was requesting a quick video on force effects. I pasted the tutorial. Then Gustapia, by the way, sorry guys for using Spanish, but I mean, we can avoid it. He's saying cool things about RailClone Lite and how many things you can do with RailClone Lights. You guys know that Lite versions, both plugins, they have no restrictions at all. So you can do, commercial restrictions, so you can use it in the way you want. Rafa, nice to have him here, by the way. He says, could it be possible to place the macro on a segment in order to avoid deformation on the top element? I guess this is regarding the last example you gave.
Yeah, I'm not 100% sure what you mean by that. I mean, the only way to do that, because this doesn't deform. This doesn't deform on the top segment as it is because we've used a macro and sliced it into 3 parts. There's not a macro in RailClone which you could use to slice a segment directly in the RailClone graph, which would basically be like having RailClone Slice in the RailClone graph. I don't know if that's kind of what you're requesting, which we did discuss, but there were quite a lot of limitations to do with the way that RailClone works internally that made that challenging. So we didn't go down that route, and instead we've got the RailClone Slice modifier instead as a way of approaching it. But that would be interesting to be able to sort of parametrically slice directly inside the RailClone graph. Gosh, lots of questions coming in.
Yep.
LODs and RailClone. LODs has been discussed before, and camera clipping has. The limitation of that is, and games artists have asked this, I understand it. The limitation of it is to do with the way RailClone builds graphs. So although we could do it, obviously if you remove so the way the segments butt up against one another in RailClone, right? One segment is determined by the position of the previous one, and that's how it renders. You would need to bake the RailClone object, and only then could you start removing segments, because otherwise they'd all move. Yeah. So it would require a different approach to RailClone, where at the end you had to sort of stop it being parametric, bake the object into those positions internally, I mean, and then be able to remove them. So it currently is sort of at odds with the way that RailClone builds arrays, and that's why it's not easy to implement, and it tends to be a small subset of our users that need it, because LODs, really games artists are the ones that need those, and they generally don't even need them in 3ds Max, they need them in the games engine. So we have had requests to be able to output the RailClone object at different LOD levels, and I totally understand that, and there are some workarounds which maybe I'll include in the next one if there's interest.
We have a few more.
Is there a way to prevent forest cut edges, the block version, from overshooting the spline they're generated by? Not currently. They are just, as you know, they're made of smallish blocks. The only thing I think you could do is possibly to cull the end off with like render time booleans or something, but it'd be quite an unnatural stop to the hedge. What I tend to do is to adjust the other end where you can't see it until move it around so that the hedges that you can see, the end you can see is the one that works. But yeah, it's just a limitation of that kind of hedging whereby you're scattering like modular pieces of hedge. In RailClone, of course, you could use adaptive mode and kind of shuffle them around, but it's got its own problems to do with hedges, like high poly stuff. I make classic. I don't know what those panels are. Objects. I think I need to read that one more carefully. So thank you for that question. That looks like one I could answer next time when I've got more time to think about it.
Yeah, there's a bunch of questions coming in.
Yeah, wow, yeah. No. For the sine wave, I did that a while ago, but using a curved spline and aligning the top of the fence. Yeah, that's a perfectly acceptable approach. You could have made the spline this shape and then aligned it to the top. This is how I used to do it, actually, and aligned the thingies to the top of the spline and then have them scale down to meet the ground. Or if you don't care about them just sticking through the floor, just make them long enough that, it doesn't matter. So that's an option. And actually, depending on my time, which I suspect I'm already over, I have got an example of how that might be done a little bit later as well.
I would say we have like 20 minutes, Paul.
2 hours, 20 minutes?
No, that's 20 minutes from now.
Okay. Right, I will move on. So,
of course, sorry to interrupt you. Some of the questions, that you guys are dropping will be taken into consideration for the next time.
Yeah, we always keep hold of this, and either if the questions are suitable and we can answer them, they either find their way into the next live stream or sometimes a fully fledged tutorial, depending on how much attention they need and how much broad interest we think there'll be.
Yeah.
So it looks like I've lost my graphics for this one. So I'll just jump straight into 3ds Max. Had a question the other day about someone basically said that when they wanted to tweak the colors of a forest pack scatter, that going in and finding all the different maps in what can sometimes be quite complex materials, depending on the plant and where you've got it from, is a bit of a chore. And is there an easy way to find all those maps and color correct them? And interestingly, this is a feature we added with the last version of Forest Pack, so that you don't actually need to go and touch the maps. If you just want to do some basic color correction, you can do it directly from the Forest Pack interface. So if I open up the material rollout, which because it contains some legacy stuff, most people don't dive into, but in here there is actually some new stuff too. So if I come down here, you've actually got a whole color correction panel here. Now what this lets you do is to shift the hue, saturation and brightness of all of the maps in this scatter to which a forest color map is being used, right? So that works quite well. So, but because you need a forest color map, what I would always recommend you do, even if you've loaded them from our library, is hit this optimize materials button here. And what this will do is it will go through all the materials in this scatter, and you can get it to add forest color maps to the diffuse map and the translucency map slot optionally, which are usually the ones that are going to affect the actual appearance of the tree. You've also got the option to exclude materials based on names of the maps. So you might not, for example, want to color correct things like trunk and bark and things like that, but that's quite dependent on the materials and the maps being named correctly, which, as we all know, often they're not. So you would always want to run that first. And then I'm going to try and be brave here and run a interactive render. Let's see if it works while live streaming. Okay, so as an extreme example, what I've got here are some green trees. Like so. Excuse me, it's not a very beautiful scene. But what I can do with these trees is to maybe make them autumnal just by hue shifting down into the reddy orange range. And you just do that by just dragging the hue shift slider over a little bit. And you can see that's kind of working. I'm just dragging everything into the reddy orange range there. I mean, you can go too far and make them purple, but we don't want to do that. So yeah, so I mean, it's really quite simple. You could up the saturation a little bit if you wanted to as well. And we're getting some interesting autumnal colors. This is a bit of an extreme example. Usually people are just shifting the greens around a little bit. The only drawback of doing that potentially is that you might accidentally hue shift the trunk or something you don't mean to. As you can see has happened here. The trunk of the tree has gone a little bit pink too. So to get around that, we've got this option here, which is apply to hue range. And basically what this does is it only targets things within a certain range, a certain distance of that color chosen in that swatch. So I can turn that on, and because the hue width is 0, basically it's quite narrow, I'm not seeing anything very much. Let me just shift that across to the left a little bit. But if I increase that, I should be able to get it to a point where I can target, there we go. I can target the leaves, but you can see as this render clears up, the trunk is not now affected. So this is a really quick way of color correcting whole scatters if you need to, just to do a little bit of tweaking without you having to go in and actually manipulate the materials. It might not solve all your problems, but 90% of the time, this can really help you out and saves you a bit of post-production as well, possibly. So yeah, I wanted to mention that one. And then move on to the curtain wall tutorial. So this was a question that we had just yesterday. So my scene is very basic. Didn't have a lot of time, but just wanted to quickly show you how I might cut out a curtain wall now using RailClone Slice and a macro too. So first of all, this is, like I say, it's very basic, but imagine this is my modular unit here of my curtain wall. I've got a bottom, a top, sides, and then I've got a panel that would repeat in between there. So what you do basically is add a RailClone Slice modifier to this, and using this we would start to cut this model up before adding it to... Yeah, I've got it.
Okay.
Sorry, had to do it once. Okay, so all I've done in that time when I forgot to switch cameras is added a RailClone Slice modifier here to this panel here, which has a bottom, a top, a right side and left side, and then an evenly, X evenly and a Y evenly repeating segment. So would have formerly involved a certain amount of cutting that up manually or modeling it as separate parts, but with RailClone Slice, you can save a bunch of time. So basically, what you do is turn on the elements we're going to want to output. So left, right, we're going to want evenly because we've got this bit in the middle, and I haven't got a corner segment here. And we're going to want default, which will be the panel in between the two. And then, I mean, you can do it numerically, but to be honest, I quite like to go in and just move the slices around with the mouse. I just find it's a little bit easier. If you're being fussy, you can snap them to bits of the geometry, but I'm not being fussy. And I just want to put these to encapsulate the areas that I want to cut out. Now, so evenly and default actually have two slice planes. They've got the start and then the end, which is somewhere over there, their end. I'm in the default, sorry, there we go. I'm on the default. So they've got a start and an end. And if you look up in the sub-object list, you can see I've got a default slice plane, but there's not an option for the other half, the other side of that default. That doesn't mean you can't manipulate it, because you can just pick it up and move it. Even though you can't select it up here, you can pick it up and move it manually. And you can see it. So I think people have asked for that to be added, but actually you don't really need it because it's there, but you just need to select it. Same with evenly. I've got two slice planes. I can pick it up and move it without having to select it manually from up here. So yeah, so basically I've done all the slices on the x-axis. I would want to do them now on the y-axis, which is top, bottom, default and evenly again. So let's do top, which is here, bottom, which is here, default, and then add a little bit of size to that. And then I can pick it manually. And evenly. Sorry, it's not very exciting to watch someone move slice planes around, but once this is done, that's it. Okay, so there you've got those cut out. Now, if you've got little artifacts like that, you can come into operate on and change it to poly, and often clears that up. So if you're finding you've got little cut artifacts or something like that, just change the operate on mode to poly, and that fixes that. Okay, so with that done, we're ready to add that to RailClone. Now, there's a couple of time-saving tips here. So first of all, let me open RailClone and open the style editor for you to check this out. Okay, so we could start building this up using the array2s generator and then doing all the little tricks you need to do in order to target the intersections and so on and so forth. But and that's fine. But it's often ends up with a lot of nodes, and it takes a little bit longer to explain, and it's harder for you to do. Far better if you're creating a facade like this, to use a generator called A2S with intersections, right? It's in the macro properties. Now, there's a caveat. This A2S with intersections macro is a little bit out of date. It needs updating for the best performance. So in the description below this video, there's a direct link to a newer macro, which will do this for you. And in order to use it, what you need to do is to just add a macro node, right click on it, go to macro, load from, and then you would locate the RCM file that you download from the link in this video. And here it is, A2S for intersections. This will update very soon, hopefully, in RailClone, so you won't need to load it. You can just pick it from the macros browser, but for now, this is a way to do it. So there is our macro, okay? And you can see it's got a bunch of inputs, but these are all easy because they all correspond to parts of this RailClone Slice modifier. So first thing I would want to do is to give it a spline. And then I'm not gonna use a spline for the Y size. I'll just set a height of like, I don't know, 5 meters or something. Not sure how big this is. And then I'm gonna set Y rotation to 90 to turn it up. Yeah. So what I want to do now is to add a segment node, pick this piece of cutout facade from the scene, and make any changes now that I might want to do later. So for example, I'm going to change the alignment Z to pivot to make sure that everything snaps back together later, because you can see these are different thicknesses. So I need to do that. And I might also turn off bend. Maybe. Maybe I'll leave it on. See how it goes. Okay, so with that done, what you've got is down here on the general, you've got the ability to pick a piece of this piece of geometry using this drop-down list. So if I knew I was going to, for example, wire this into the default input, I would pick default from here, and then it would output the default geometry, which is this piece here, and I'd wire that to default input. That, though, is a little bit tedious because you have to do that for every single one of these inputs. So we've tried to speed that up for you. And what we can do is right-click on it and go to Clone for RailClone Slice. So let me just emphasize that, Clone for RailClone Slice. So you click on that, and it basically creates a RailClone Slice for every one of the possible inputs. And then all you have to do, and I'm afraid we haven't been able to automate this part, but then all you have to do is wire them up. So basically, you'd wire the default to the default. If I turn that 90 degrees. There we go. Now these come in the same order as this macro. So actually, it's not that hard just to keep connecting those up. There aren't really corners, but anyway, we'll leave them there. Just a case of doing this. Should sing a song or something while I'm doing this just to entertain you. Okay, so you can see, yeah, it's a bit tedious to be watching, but you can see it's not complicated and it doesn't take very long. And of course, actually, once you had this set up, you could just save this to the library and you'd never have to create that graph ever again. So not looking great, but that's because I haven't set the X and Y evenly distance yet. So let's try this as 500, for example, 200, there we go, 100, 150. So you can see my facade is procedural now. I can easily come in and edit these at any time. More floors, fewer floors, change the width between the panels. Yeah, so it's pretty straightforward to use, especially if you've got this macro. It saves a bit of time, just saves a bit of messing around, adding other nodes yourself manually. And what this is doing that a normal Array2S generator wouldn't necessarily do is it's scaling the default panels on the y-axis. And it's also targeting the intersections between the evenly segments, the start and the end, the top and the bottom, all with different geometry, different inputs, which you'd have to add using a different type of macro otherwise. As always, beauty of this is that it should be able to be deformed. If I divide it, you can create curved facades very easily. So, you know, It's got a little bit of setup time, but after that, it can save you a ton of effort. So I hope that makes some sort of sense. And we'll quickly move on if we've got time. Are there any questions, Jaime?
Yep, a couple of them. So there's a question. Sometimes when using V-Ray IPR and adjusting force back, scatter objects, materials, the objects turn black. Why is that?
IPR is a tricky thing because basically Max was never designed for IPR, and in order to make IPR work, the renderers employ a lot of workarounds and cheats, and very well, but it's sort of going against the core infrastructure of the thing, and so it's quite hard for us to keep up with all the various ways in which that's being done, basically. So we tend to squash those bugs as they come in. So if you haven't reported it, then please let us know if you've got something that reproduces that particular problem, and you can send it to us. Maybe there's something we can do about it. It might be something we need to talk to, I'm guessing probably Chaos, probably V-Ray or Corona, about it maybe too. It just depends on where the problem is and what's happening. It's constant. It's a moving target, IPR. So it's more stable now than it has been, but there's still moments. Anything else?
Okay. Yeah, there's Roland Beaubois, I think it's pronounced that way. Says, while we're on the fence, can you talk to us about how to apply different texture to each post? I don't get that one.
Oh, changing the hue and stance for each post.
Yeah.
Well, I've gone off the fence now, but so just quickly, there are a couple of ways you could do that for each post. This is obviously not the right thingy, but if you just want to randomize the materials, obviously you can do that in RailClone, sorry, with the material node. So you can randomize, you can take a material in and randomize between multiple materials. That will randomize your materials for you. You can also randomize the offset of the UVW. So you've got a UVW X-form modifier here. And if you go into the random settings here, you can randomize tile, offset, and rotation. So you can do that directly in RailClone 2. In terms of hue and saturation, then we've got RailClone Color, which is somewhere here. RailClone Color, which lets you do various randomization things down here in the tint section. So you can either pick color randomly from a gradient, or you can get colors from a map and overlay those randomly with different blending modes. And then alternatively, you might find the built-in sort of V-Ray Corona bitmap, multi-bitmap, whatever they're called, I can't find it now, which have hue and offset and saturation randomization built into them, also work with Forest Pack and RailClone. So you can also use just your traditional shader techniques to do that too. So there's loads of options there, hopefully. But if it's a specific case, then let me know, and maybe it's a thing that we can look at.
Okay, Gustapia says in Spanish, there should be a way to take all the nodes and put them together. He doesn't know if that's possible.
Do you mean like to make it into a macro? Because you can do that. So for example, I mean, this is a newish thing, and it doesn't make a lot of sense in this case, maybe. But let's say if I wanted to put this in a macro, what you can do is to add a new macro node, just copy all of these, copy and paste them, and then I've made a macro out of a macro in this case, but that is basically now a container for all those nodes, and it's automatically converted all the inputs to inputs. Okay, so it's a good way of bundling up more complex graphs. In fact, that's all these macros are, is just bundles of complex graphs. But we've made it much easier for you to make them, because you can just copy and paste them in there, and it converts all of the inputs for you. So hopefully that answers that question.
And that's all. There's a comment about the endless hunger of assets. So
Yeah, yeah.
you know,
Can't get enough assets.
I mean, we with RailClone 6. By the way, you guys might remember Rafa Zarza, which is in the audience. He was the presenter of the RailClone 6 Q&A. What that was back, I think that was in June last year. I will paste the link here. We did revamp some of the libraries coming out with RailClone 6, and the roadmap is to take care of the rest of it. But again, we're working on it. We got so many things to take care of. So I would say that before the end of the year, you guys should see some new libraries for both revamped and new libraries for RailClone, which doesn't mean a new version of RailClone, by the way. Okay, Paul. You've been talking for 75 minutes now.
It doesn't feel like it.
Yeah, I know.
Feels like much longer.
So how longer do we want to go?
Oh, till people are bored.
Well, yeah, until midnight, right?
So this was a question we had about how do you scale an area just within a spline. So this is a forest pack question. So not to create new areas with different grass in them. They just wanted to subtly scale just patches of some, I'm not sure what plant it was, inside of a spline. And this is another trick that you can use forest effects for, because we have a built-in forest effect that allows you to do exactly this. So let me switch over. Here's that scene. So basically I'm in the effects panel of Forest Pack again. All you need to do is to click to add a new effect, click on the browser, and since this is a scale effect, it's a transform effect, you come down to the bottom section here and it says scale by spline. So what we'll do is just pop that open. And this is, I think this came with Forest Pack 8, the ability to use splines inside Forest Effects, because it opens up a whole load of stuff we can do without you having to add actual areas. So what I can do is in this spline parameter here, I can just pick this spline from the scene. And then there's basically a few settings here. There's a fall off distance, a scale curve, the option to scale on the Z only, and then there's the option to apply this effect either to objects inside the curve, outside the curve, or both. So I'm going to change that to 1 because I want that to be inside the curve. So what do I need to do? I need to open the scale curve here, and this determines the difference in scale from the edge of the spline on the left to a set distance towards the inside or outside the spline. So if I just dial that all the way up, you can see that it's starting to change. Like so, right. So, and now if I add a bit of fall off distance, you can see it's working. Let me just switch that because I think that must be, there we go. So, just about to see it there. So you can see this fall off distance is basically allowing us to just control how far that scale effect deviates from the boundary of the spline. So it's pretty straightforward to use, but it was an interesting question that came up because, well, it's always nice when we've got a solution for a question already. But you can see how that works. And then on Z only, if I turn that on, you can see at the moment it's scaling it on all 3 axes. If I turn that on, now it's only scaling it on the Z axis. So I'm basically just stretching the plants up on the Z axis. Obviously, you're not going to get away with this if these are huge scaling values. But if you just want some subtle controllable distance scale variation, in your scatter, then you can do that. Of course, it's procedural, so you can move this around and easily control the growth or the height of your grass using this. Obviously, you can use this technique to control plenty of other attributes of your scatter as well. So could in this case it's scale. It could be some sort of transform. It could be the actual plants being used. But then you're getting into normal areas. So yeah, I mean it's got lots of potential, but in this case it solved that particular problem. So it's quite an interesting one. What? Challenge accepted. Okay. It's not the last example, Jaime. Jaime is saying it's the last example.
Okay.
I'm gonna stick with this theme a little bit and go with border plants. So this isn't an effect, but it's another kind of area related question, and this one was about how you would create the kinds of plant beds where you've got one type of plant on the inside and one type of plant just around the outside. And you know, what a ways. There's tons of ways to do it, and you could use an effect for it. This was one way that could be suggested. So I'm just going to open the file up. Just give me a second to do that in the background. There we go. Okay, so let me just delete what I've already done. This is kind of what we're going for here with this, with these smaller plants around the outside and longer plants in the middle. I'm going to just delete how I did that so I can show you and build it back up again. And some of you might have some ideas already. Sorry, I thought I'd reset all these already. Clearly not. Okay. So what I have got, first of all, I'm using forest sets. There's no real reason for this except just to make life easier. So I'm imagining I've got 4 different types of tall plants, which are these triangular or pyramidal ones, and 4 of the smaller ones, which are these box ones. I've added those to a forest set just to make life a little bit easier in Forest Pack. I just like this management stuff. And then on this forest set here, I've also got the 3 splines. Okay, but I'll just do one for now. I've got a Forest Pack object here. And what I want to do is I'll just pick one of the splines for now. So I'll just pick one of the splines and add it there. And what's happening is what you'd imagine is happening is that I'm scattering a random combination of the contents of those forest sets in this area. So first of all, what I want to do is to show you how to pull it back from the edge, okay, without having to draw another area, spline, or something else. And you can use the density fall off for this. I'm pretty sure everyone knows about density fall off in Forest Pack. So all you basically do is just come in and just add a couple of new points and create a stepped forest fall off like that instead. So it's just going to abruptly stop. And then when you increase the include density, you can see I'm pulling that back from the edge. So far so good. You know, my graph wasn't perfect, so I've got 1 or 2 there, but if I had more time, I'd set those values manually. So that gives us our internal, but of course we're still scattering all of the plants from these things. So what I want to do is just to scatter the taller plants. And the way you can do that is inside this area is to come into this option here, which is select models. So I'll just click on that, click on pick, and then pick the forest set that contains the pyramids. So there we go. And now you can see there's only pyramid scattering there because I'm only distributing this forest set in that area. So far, so good. So what I want to do now is to add the same area again. And I'm going to swap the models by clicking on select models and pick the other forest set. And what I want to do is somehow fill this gap between the edge and the internal ones. And there's a very simple option for doing that. Is down here called invert curve. So as soon as I check that, I basically fill the area outside. So that's pretty straightforward. You can easily do that. That works on any shape of area, and you've got 2 different planting zones in your beds. So you could do that sort of thing, and that saves you having to even use a forest effect and that kind of thing. The reason that I've set this up with forest sets for splines, for example, is that if I wanted to add these 2 other splines, I'd have to add them each twice more, so you'd end up with 6 areas here, which is and if you've got 100 areas, it's going to get a bit unwieldy. So the beauty of forest sets is that I can add all of the splines to the forest set, and then all I need to do is to pick the forest set from the scene instead, and then it fills all of the other splines, and any number of splines that I add to that forest set will instantly get the same effect. So it's quite a powerful, flexible system. Lovely. Right, I'm going to test your patience just slightly by going to something that we mentioned at the beginning, and I'll try and do this as quickly as possible and gauge interest in this as an approach. But in the Autodesk University presentation, we used a lot of tricks using spline offset, subdivide modifier, and some selection tools. Hello. Sorry, 3ds Max has just crashed. You can't see it, but I'll just open that back up again. where was I? And yeah, the selection modifier to kind of try and not only scatter things on the terrain, but to create the whole terrain procedurally and to try and find ways that you can kind of link together the geometry that things sit on as well as the things that are scattered on it. So that you could, for example, draw a few splines, and then with that you'd get, in the Autodesk University, it was the road markings, the pavements, yeah.
I think you didn't change screens.
That's fine. I'm not demonstrating anything at the moment.
Okay,
I'm just talking while 3ds Max loads up again.
That's right.
Yeah, and then pavements, the fences, and then even beyond that, houses and everything else. And then at the end of that, there was also it was like a little urban park in the scene, and it basically used the same technique, but because obviously time's limited, as it always is, I didn't get a chance to kind of demo how you'd use the same technique for a park. And what I wanted to do now was just to show the setup for that. Not I think we all know how to scatter on a surface and along a spline by now, so it's more how to create those surfaces just using basic 3ds Max modifiers to create a little procedural system that is just quite interesting way of working in 3ds Max. Maybe you'll work like this already, I'm not sure, but for me I find it quite powerful and great for easy updating things that are, you need to iterate on a lot of times. So I know I'm talking a lot, but it's just while Max loads up, so just give me a second here and I will be with you. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to switch. Okay. So let me see. Untitled. Okay. Well, okay. I'll just go for it and then we'll see what happens. So let's say, for example, that you had you want a park that's a particular shape, and let's say this is the boundary of that park. Okay, so this is just example. Obviously, it depends on the layout of your park and so forth. But let's imagine then that as well as this park, you want a path around the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this border here. I'm going to duplicate it as a reference and call it, I don't know, spline boundary, let's say. Okay. Now, what you can do is use our free spline offset modifier, completely free, and I can offset that original spline just a little bit to create the path on the inside. So far, nothing fancy. Something like that. Don't really need to change anything down here. That's fine. Now, of course, those two things are linked. So if I go back and change the original spline, actually, I will turn off keep original spline. So these two things are linked. If I come back and change the original spline, the path also updates. Right? So pretty obvious right so far. So what if we also want to cut some paths through that? We can do that too with a separate spline. So I might draw a nice curvy path through there and another one through here. I don't know, maybe I want to go from here, just for example, around to there. So this is going to be our path. So let's now attach those together. Okay. So hypothetically, that's our path. Now, once again, I don't want to I want to leave that spline where it is so that I can go back and edit at any point. So I'll make a reference from it. Let's call this spline paths. And then add a spline offset modifier to that. And change the end type, because you can see it's gone a bit crazy. And that's because it's trying to close each one of those splines. So we'll change the end type to open but. And basically what that does, it just closes the end off and gives you a, not that one, gives you a thickness either side of that spline. Right? And I can also turn off keep original spline. So now I've just got outlines. But of course, this isn't terribly helpful because my intersections aren't really intersecting, they're just overlapping. But we can do that in spline offset 2. So I can turn on heel intersecting splines, and I can turn on double-sided effect. And that gives me a network of paths, which I can use, which is pretty cool. So that gives me that. So now what I want to do from those, and it's just a case of building these things up all the time, is I think I'm going to build the plots where I would say the plants and the grass would be. So what I want to do is take this one and combine those together, and that will create this just these patches in the middle where I'm going to if I was using Forest Pack, put all the trees and the grass and everything else. So what I'm going to do is use spline boolean for that. So I'll draw a spline and then I'll add a compound shape. And then add as operands my path and my internal boundary, like so, and then change the mode to let's see, let's turn that one off. Maybe change the order of those. Hang on a minute. One second. This normally works beautifully. Okay, I'm just going to try and do something. I'm just going to delete this first. This normally works much better than this. Sorry about this. It's fun to watch a man struggle with booleans. Finally got there. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So I had to add the boundary as an attachment, then the splines as a subtract. I don't know why it took my brain so long to work out, but we got there in the end. So this is what I was trying to get. Basically, was an area which is just these just outlines the growth areas. Now, once again, the beauty of this is that at any point I can come back to the splines that define the paths. And I can easily, change it to change my path network, which also affects the areas where the planting will be and everything else. So it's really powerful. Now, what do we do with that? So what we can do with this is to start to turn this into geometry, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make another reference of it, and let's call this object grass. And now we want to convert it to a mesh. So what we can basically do is add a subdivide modifier to that. And then maybe change size a little bit. Go. So I've just added a subdivide modifier. I'm just reducing the size down so that I've got some detail so that I can start to have a terrain that will deform. And then you can scatter on that, but it's a little bit flat and boring. So what I like to do is to add a little bit of push to it. So I can push up the middle, or you could push it down if you wanted to recess or add noise to it. But you don't really want that to extend right to the edges necessarily, because it won't interact with the path very well. So what I'm going to do is use tie select. So this is a modifier that comes with TieFlow. Comes with the free version too, and it works fine. It's just a little bit slower than the pro version. So you could use volume select, but tie select is just that much faster. So what I can do in tie select is to come into this and then change the mode. Where is it? Selector settings mode to open edges. Open edge. So what that's done is it's just automatically picked every vertex around the edge of that geometry, and then you could add a soft select to it. Like so, just to pull into the center, and then invert that. Right, so I've selected the middle, coming out gradually towards the edge, and then you could push it. with another modifier. See, I'm keeping everything procedural, coming up like that. So, and you can play around obviously with those graphs, that soft selection graph, and we can add a bit of noise to that too if we want. This is a very, very fast demo just to illustrate the concept really. So you kind of get the idea, I hope, of how that works. Yeah, so we end up with something like that. So we've got a terrain defined by those splines, and you can see that again that I can come back in and adjust this at any point, and my terrain also is adapting, which could have forest pack objects scattered on it. The edges could have RailClone things scattered around them, and so on and so forth. So it's a pretty cool technique, and I know I'm testing everyone's patience here, but I'm just going to finish this off by doing the path as well. So let me just unhide the splines that got hidden as a result of doing that, and just hold Shift G just to get rid of that for a second. So I'm basically going to create the paths now as well. So what I want to do is come into splines, just like before, using compound splines. Hopefully I can get the Boolean settings right this time, to basically piece together the path geometry based on what we have. So we want, we're going to want to add operands. I'm going to want the outside, and I'm going to want the, it's probably that one. Yes. Okay. So, so basically, I've picked the outside, and I've picked the spline that was used for the grassy areas as well, right? And piece them together using that shape boolean to keep it procedural. And then it's the same trick again. If I turn my geometry back on, Shift G, then I can basically subdivide that again. Yeah, subdivide it. Tie select. You could leave it flat, but you know, paths are very seldom flat. Tie select operation is, sorry, where is it? Selection mode is open edges. We want to soft select, use soft selection. Soft select to the middle of the path roughly. Invert it. And then you can do what you like with that. So we could push it. This for me is when Max is really fun, when you can start stacking up all these modifiers and get some interesting effects with them. So, you know, you can either make this come up in the middle or down or whatever. You can come back to the tie select and adjust the graph if you want a different shape instead. And of course you can add a bit of noise to that as well. So, you know, so I've got this kind of geometry now that's easy to adjust both parts. If I just pick the spline, hide that again. I can easily come in and say, oh, you know what, my client said that they'd rather have a path through here, or they want a path through here as well. Then the beauty of this is that I can come in and just do that. And the whole lot is building and healing and building the geometry, and it would also be building the forest pack objects that are placed on top of it, and everything else. And because I've basically got a ton of splines and surfaces here, everything I need really, if I turn the geometry off, you can see all my splines are still here, and if I unhide them, they're all still here, including those things. All of those things are fair game. You know, I could easily start to add a curb, for example, using RailClone. And providing I can find the right curve, I should be able to put a curve around. It's not quite the right curve. Let's do that one. There we go. So, you know, I can add a curve around like that. You could add fences to it, and so on and so forth. So, I mean, I'm labouring the point here, but you know, you get the idea, right? You can use all these procedural bits and bobs that we've created to drive a whole procedural system very easily. Get carried away now. So let's say we want a fence around the outside. We can do that too. Yeah. So yeah, you can see how it works. And again, it's all procedural. So if you adjust the spline, you adjust everything. And I could go on like that for ages. We could add all the trees and everything, but not too worried. Yes, Lars has pointed out the only problem is UVW mapping, and to a certain extent that is true. Of course, with triplanar mapping, you don't need to worry too much. It depends what your path's made of. So if it's like gravel or something like that, then you can probably get away with just a tiling randomizing pattern. And I would also say, if you watch the Autodesk University talk, there is some discussion about how I did that for roads, which was basically by using a tiling map, but kind of obviously we've got splines everywhere here. So we could put markers down the center of them. We could use RailClone, forest pack objects scattered in the gutters, like leaves, twigs, sticks, you know, whatever, to give a sense of direction. We could use V-Ray distance textures to kind of tint the colors as they reach the edges of the path. That would give you that sort of sense of the direction on the path. So there are ways around that. But obviously, if this was a paved path, that might be more problematic. That said, you've still got the splines there. Look, maybe you could do that with RailClone instead of the way that I've done it here. So there's lots of options. It's a very handy technique, I would say. Just a wild card, just a bit of fun R&D experimentation with modifiers that I think plays really well with our plugins, and that you might be interested to try. And I wanted to finish on that note, I think, because I've probably lost your patience.
No one left.
No one left? Well, that's a start.
No.
So that's the spline offset modifier. I know most people probably know about it. It's a really handy modifier for just procedurally manipulating splines, and it plays really well. Whether you're doing this with it or not, it plays really well with RailClone and Forest Pack for all kinds of uses. So worth playing with if you haven't done so. I think you've posted a link there, haven't you, Jaime, to it?
Yeah.
Yeah. And
I pasted the link again to the AU talk.
Ah, cool. Thank you.
Yeah, which I think is very interesting. So don't forget to check that.
Yeah, it's all kind of wild sort of stuff, trying these kinds of things out, but it's nice to try and experiment with new to me anyway, workflows, and some of it, if not all of it, might be helpful for other people.
Okay, so we just passed the barrier of 100 minutes for the first time.
Is it the first time, really?
Yeah, almost 2 hours. So
okay. It was good value for money.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So we will be back in March with our first guest.
Or end of February? Not sure. We'll keep you posted.
It's February, Paul.
I know.
So I guess March will be. So nothing else. I mean, it's been great. Happy to see everyone back, really. I mean, we were very excited to be back doing this. So we are going to be back to the monthly live streams.
This one question, Jaime, that I can't bear not to answer.
Let's go ahead, please, man.
So
I don't want to play the cap on this one. So
there's a question just says, is there a way to add a single tree without a spline? And I often see this in scenes that we get sent, the like mixture between people planting individual trees and then a forest pack scatter. And you can use forest pack for all of it. So I just wanted to mention that quickly, that how you do that. And again, I think most people know this, but it's just super quick, don't worry. So I'll just bring in a.
In fact, that question has been asked twice. So yeah.
Has it? Okay, right. Here we go.
Yeah. So
here we go. So icon mode. Okay, whatever. So basically, do you need to put surface in? You need something to plant it on. But let's give it a go. So basically, what you would do is in surfaces, add a surface like so. That's fine. And then come to distribution mode, and no, don't do that. Come to items editor mode and change this mode to custom edit and click yes. Now what you're doing now is just planting trees one by one. So we can just come into this little tree button here, which puts you in the item sub-object level, click on add, and you just click to place a tree. That's it. Individual trees. Nothing to it. And of course, you can easily move those around after the fact by picking them, rotating them, scaling them, just like you would a normal object. But it just saves you from having to have proxies or whatever in your scene. If you've already got the trees loaded into a forest object, you can do this. It's nice and efficient in the viewports too. So I just wanted to mention that because that was one of the questions. All right, I'll let you finish now.
I mean, nothing much to say. It's again, we'll looking towards March.
Yeah.
And thanks everyone for showing up. I mean, it's been great.
Yeah, thanks so much.
Yep.
And keep the questions coming for next time, for the next one. And I will go back through all of the questions that we've had today to see if there are any we missed, add them to next time, and see you in a month-ish.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
Gracias.